So when we look at this missile launch, we see from the North Koreans, one of our correspondents earlier described this as typical of the North Korean playbook to try and sort of upstage the geopolitical conversation as we see the great powers in the US and China coming together. What does this do for this conversation that we're seeing between Trump and Xi? What does that mean for investors, though? Because I've got this chart, we talked about this earlier, 7498 if you're on the Bloomberg, and it shows limited pricing in of concerns around tech stocks in Taiwan, and it's this kind of stock that you might expect to be seeing some weakness in if people were really worried about what was going to happen between this US and Chinese trade relationship. Yeah,
so first of all, I think it sort of helps the discussion in a way, what North Korea have done, because the easy thing is Trump has got a very low popularity at home. If he can prove that he's doing something on the diplomatic front, then that's a sort of plus for him and should improve his approval ratings. So what you might have is the discussion with him and President Xi saying, well, in fact, China will go further. North Korea is a problem child for China. They have started to move to put some pressure on it, and I think they can move further. Not the full UN sanctions, but they'll move further, and that gives President Trump something to say, well, this is what I've achieved. So I think that it's a distraction that actually helps them. But as far as the markets are concerned, we've seen Trump sort of fail in many of his policy agendas. This could give him a little bit of credibility, and so you could see a bit of a boost to the Trump reflation trade if people think he's got more power than he had a few weeks ago.
Matt, jump in.
Will Trump walk away with a better deal, you think? A better trade deal with China eventually than he seems to think he has now?
That's a big question. In a way, the discussion with North Korea sort of manages to put that on to the side, and that's, of course, the major issue that we're all concerned about. I suspect what you'll get out of this is pretty little out of this particular discussion. Maybe there'll be a bit more commitment from Chinese companies to invest in the US in order to employ more people in the US. But I suspect we're not going to see very much. But what we may see is him stepping back from his rhetoric against China. And so in terms of global trade, that should be a good thing.
Interesting that the conversation around trade, of course, often focuses in on the US and China, and for good reason. This is a chart 198 on the Bloomberg. US reliance on China trade, and shows that growing over years. And it's clear that makes some in Washington very nervous. Wilbur Ross writing in the FT today, talking about how Donald Trump wants a free and fair trade, not just a free trade agreement in terms of NAFTA. But he's also raising a lot of questions about where trade relationships go, and 10 questions, it seems, that the administration wants to address about what it is exactly that trade deficits mean for the United States. And this seems to be something that the administration is still wrestling with.
Yes, and it is. It's those countries with big, or where the US has a trade deficit against those countries, China, Germany, where the focus will consistently lie. That needs to be sort of brought closer into balance. But that's discussion globally. That's the discussion we have in Europe about the problem with Germany having this huge trade surplus, where countries like the UK have a big trade deficit.
Jonathan, do you expect to see more legislation from Trump that actually passes after the failure of the health care bill? Do you expect to see stimulus, infrastructure spending, deregulation, a tax agreement, or are you less confident of that now?
Well, that's quite an issue, and we've got an issue at the moment in terms of whether we can get the budget through, whether they can sort of achieve anything at the moment. I think that there has to be some sort of accord now between Republicans in Congress and Trump to try and get this presidency, and Republican Congress back on track. So, yes, I think there is a better hope than people are looking at the moment.